Alright everybody, welcome to the start of my new Phantom Dust analysis series. We're going to be going through different skills in the game, and I'm going to be sharing with you my thoughts on how I use them and just the general way that I think about the game. So starting off, we're going to look at what I consider the core melee skills. And so when I say core, I mean the ones that basically just do damage without any fancy effects, and the main ones that fit that category. I've left out a couple like Laser Blade, but that's just because they're a little bit more niche, and these are the ones that I'm always considering. For this ones, we're going to start with Psycho Knife and Hyper Kick. And here is the effect and visual of Psycho Knife for anyone who doesn't know what it does. So, the number one thing that stands out about Psycho Knife is its cost and low damage profile. And what this means is that it gets more value and impact from damage buffs like Tiger Strength compared to a more expensive skill. So if you have a 2 damage Psycho Knife that would take 10 hits to kill someone normally, and when you add a Tiger Strength to that, you are doubling the damage your Psycho Knife does, and so you're cutting the number of hits you need in half. And if you compare that to a Psycho Blade instead, which needs 4 hits for 5 damage each, it goes up to 7, and then that will be 3 hits to take someone from 20 to 0. It's not to say that Psycho Blade is bad with Tiger Strength, it's definitely not, but just that whenever you have these low cost, low damage skills, damage buffs are really, really valuable for them. And Slag Laser is another comparable one. One of the major weaknesses here of Psycho Knife is that susceptibility to erase shields. And the number one thing that most people might think of for, like, if you want to counter a Psycho Knife would be Fortress of Iron, because that's the go-to melee erase shield. And Psycho Knife is actually so cheap that I don't really consider Fortress of Iron a good counter to it. Because if you're having to stay at 4 in order to counter their 2 cost skill, it's going to be really hard, and there's probably going to be a lot of opportunities where you don't have enough aura to do it. And even if you do, if they fake you out, they can do that with such low aura. So I think it's very easy to play around a Fortress of Iron with a Psycho Knife. But if they instead have an Iron Skin and Angel's Wing, these are as expensive or cheaper than Psycho Knife, and so it's going to be a lot harder to play around that. Which is why I consider them more of a counter to it than Fortress of Iron. Now, this is the other big reason you want to use Psycho Knife, is just the hitbox combined with the speed of it and then the cost. You can just keep throwing Psycho Knife out over and over again, and if they can't erase it, you're probably going to get some hits. It's just too cheap and it requires too much of a full response, like a full cartwheel or a lot of space to walk it, that your opponents, with everything else going around in the fight, they're probably just not going to be able to respond to every single one you throw out there, which is where a lot of these really cheap skills come in handy. Is that you're just guaranteed to get some hits over the course of a match. So as for the choice of school for Psycho Knife being in Psycho, um, it has some definite strengths in attacks and erase shields that will help you get through some of those counters. Like, you can use your Psycho Burst or your Psycho Blade to break the erase shields that's going to be giving your Psycho Knife trouble, and Shield Breaker, of course. And so that is very nice synergy. Psycho Knife and Psycho Burst can be very complementary skills that both complete, two pieces of a melee-centric game plan. Um, and of course, the main downside of that is you don't have any damage buffs in Psycho, so you're going to have to go out of school for that, which isn't that big of a deal, because the only school that you could pair that wouldn't give you those damage buffs is Optical, but it does mean that if you want Tiger Strength, you're not going to get access to Faith or Nature's very good erase shields, utility skills, and reincarnation, of course, although you could get learning and grab it from that. So it's a 50-50 there, but overall still pretty useful. Next is, I'm just going to throw on the screen some skills that I recommend using with Psycho Knife. these ones are all things that tend to be very complementary to it. I haven't put optical ones here because I didn't have space for it. I mean, because optical isn't the strongest school with Psycho, but it still pairs fine with a Psycho game plan, so you can do that too. Alright, and next is Hyperkick. So Hyperkick's like number one biggest strength is that it is very, very good against cartwheelers, and it can be sort of a counter to cartwheeling. It is so fast and can travel so far that if you throw out a hyper kick and they cartwheel it, you can often follow up with a second one before they can cartwheel a second time. So it can be a guaranteed hit. And that's one trend that you're going to see throughout this series. Anything that can guarantee these hits is going to be generally a pretty valuable skill. Yeah, another thing about Hyperkick is that frame data with it. It starts up quick and it lets you take actions very quickly after. It doesn't have a lot of end lag. So when you're fighting, you can be throwing this out and then immediately block afterwards or immediately follow up. You know, it just lets you respond so flexibly and quickly depending on whatever situation you need it to. All right, and it scales with the user skill level. So what I mean by this is that there are many skills where if you use them at a very low level and at a much higher level, there isn't as big of a gap compared to some skills. Hyperkick is one of the ones that I think is the opposite. I think there is a huge difference between a player who knows what they're doing with it and a player who doesn't. And this is one of the skills that will just go from being a fine melee skill that you can use that you might have a little bit of trouble getting hits in because of its weird hitbox to something that you can close a game out with. Like, I've closed out games with just an unbuffed hyper kick because they didn't have the erase shields to deal with it. And if you don't have things that can be, shutting down the hyper kick, it can literally steal games almost on its own. It's just such a oppressive tool if you aren't really in the situation and don't have the tools to deal with it. And this is another thing that I'll be demonstrating in a clip after this. Um, Hyperkick is actually really good for manual aims. People don't really use this very often. I'm always very surprised because it's not that hard. It feels very similar to just manual aiming a blaster against someone who's trying to circle strafe you. And considering that that's one of the main weaknesses of Hyperkick, is that it's really, really easy to walk. People will just hold left on the thumbstick, and every single one of your Hyperkicks is going to miss if you're locked on. And even if people aren't trying to dodge it, they'll dodge it a lot of the time, which is definitely a weakness. But it doesn't stop it from being a powerful skill, especially if you put practice into manualing it. And as for the choice of school, I mean, it's key. So you instantly get Tiger Strength. You can get Lightning Speed 2, which works well with all melee skills. You get Dragon Slayers to strip away those shields, and Lax can do the same thing. And then you can just immediately pair it with Faith for, the best mid-range skill in the game, and the erase shields that provides. Like, being a skill in Key is generally a pretty good thing because it's really easy to make really strong combinations with Key. Okay, so here we have an example of a manual hyper kick. Use strafing, and we're just going to aim, hit, aim, hit. And here are some examples of skills that you would likely put in a hyper kick deck, depending on what school you're going for. All the lasers and blasters and stuff is more just like, having good mid-range options complements your close-range options. All right, and that is going to wrap it up for my first analysis video. Please give me any feedback you have, any things I missed about the skills that would be useful for the others to know. I'm just always open to any discussion in the comments below or in the Discord channel. So let me know what you guys think. I'll be following up with another video at some point, I'm sure. It probably won't take me another 6 months to get to it. But thank you for watching. I'll see you around.